Hello, back again.
Evening.
Evening, morning, afternoon, whatever time it is for who is listening. But yeah, so
Evening. It's evening for us.
yes, it's evening
So
for
good
us.
good evening to you is what I meant.
Okay. Yeah. So I had a couple of things that I'd been thinking of from our last conversation that I thought would be worth addressing, and then there was other stuff to move on with that more centered around you. But to dive right into it, the things from our last conversation, we were talking about raising children and dealing with our own childhood traumas and how to avoid childhood traumas in our children and things like that. And I'd been saying that a little stress wasn't a bad thing, and you'd been saying that it was. And I've realized in retrospect that I thought you might have been thinking of a little trauma is always a bad thing, which, yes, that makes sense. And I'd been thinking of the stress of a tantrum isn't a bad thing. It happens anyway, and it's part of life. And so I thought that would be a good place to start to get that point that was nagging me afterwards sorted out, because it might be nagging someone else too.
Mm. Trouble with these is full transparency. It's been a couple of weeks since we recorded. We didn't manage to do it last week.
Hmm.
Um, my memory is really bad, so I have a hard time recalling conversations. I generally try and listen through before we re-record, but I didn't get to do that today for other reasons. Um, yeah, I think
Because
like
kids,
obviously with cortisol stress, it's not good for you, and I don't think there's a way that you can actually like raise a child without having that problem. To
is
do with the tantrum
cortisol
thing,
just from
giving into it
trauma?
is not good.
Hmm.
Yeah, like there's a certain level of stress. Being unhappy is not
Hmm.
causing it. It's like anxiety is probably a better word.
Yeah.
It's that chest tightening stress that, if you didn't have such a great childhood, you know what it feels like very well. Um,
The stomach dropping out type. Oh no, and it's
yeah,
something bad's
I
going to
think there's
happen, and there's
there's
nothing I can
very,
do.
very different types. I think it's
Mm.
interesting that you went to that one, which is like I've made a mistake and now I'm going to be in trouble for it as if I did it on purpose, which is interesting. Um, Whereas for me, it's more of like more just like a persistent fear of abandonment. Um, because I was raised by a single mother, so
Mm.
wasn't exactly around a lot as you can imagine. And then there's how that passes on to relationships.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
What really?
No,
You weren't aware that I was raised by a single mother?
no, I wasn't.
Oh, okay, that's fascinating. Um, Right, I did a biography thing, but that was before we started recording together, so that makes sense. Oh well, seeing as that's come up, why don't I do a little bit of a biography on my past?
Yeah.
If you're all out there listening to us, maybe you might find it valuable to know a little bit about it. Um, I was born in Australia, effectively a result of a one night stand between my mother and my father. Um, Bad thing for him, he was running from his very tyrannical family. Um, and then was like immediately confronted with the possibility of having to have a family, which when you have that association from your home life is not exactly something you want. And my mother didn't want anything to do with him anyway, which was great for me. um there's a bunch of things about that time that I've recently learned and figured out and I'm not super pleased about, like my grandmother is very, very was a very left-leaning person. Like, grew up super spiritual and hippie and all of that, and I actually appreciate that side of things. It's a good perspective on life, but very, borderline socialist kind of person, as a lot of her generation was. And, part of the full in on the feminist revolution and all of that stuff. Boomer generation, I think. Not quite sure. 70 something now. Um, I found out more recently that she had a lot to do with the reason why my parents didn't stay together. And that my wife told me this. My mother told her in confidence, but never told me that she attempted an abortion and failed. And that both her, my grandmother, and my father were all like wanting that to go through and succeed. And I only found out these things in the last year, which is like a great shade on my upbringing. Um, I spent the first 3 years. My mother was like living on couches and friends and stuff, and then got a wee house. Her and the grandmother lived together there, and then went on a holiday, and then moved to New Zealand. They grew up here. Um, Mother's not a bad mother. She's not like she played with me a lot, I think, but also all my memories are not that, so maybe not as much as I would guess. Um, I know I have a lot of abandonment things because, she went to work and then she worked on businesses on the side and all kinds of things like that. So I didn't get a lot of time with her, I guess. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, which was helpful because she's an intellectual type, regardless of her persuasion, and my mother is not. Like, I can't talk to her about anything. She becomes like hyper aggressive and shuts down all conversation that's beyond surface level, which is probably a defense mechanism from being raised by the grandmother. Um, as she was rather violent, from what I hear, although not so much when I came around. Um, she was very useful to sharpen the sword on because she was an intellectual person and she let me flesh out my points and then had the argument with it rather than, attempting to shut down a conversation. Um, though that worldview was thoroughly ingrained into me and for a long time and probably led to a lot of the existential angst and depression I had in my teenage years.
Which worldview
The
was
sort of
that?
was like the it's hopeless, big money, corporations
Ah,
destroying the planet
yeah.
kind of, yeah. And, oppressing us all. We're all victims kind of philosophy. Um, you know.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, what else? So yeah, there was no father figure there ever. There's an opportunity at one point, I think, but my mother didn't want that. My grandmother has been on her own after leaving her partner through divorce. I'm not quite sure how old Louise was with that one, but she was younger, my mother.
So
And I think that was encouraged. Sorry? Yeah.
you've always come across to me as, and a lot of what you've said led into this impression as you've got a good handle on your own masculinity, and this makes it look to me like that was through conscious thought and effort and working out what it actually was that you were trying to be and manifest. Would that be right?
Yes. I'd say that's accurate.
Hmm. Well, that
There's later development,
yeah,
for
that
sure.
helps to helps me understand why you've got the handle on it that you do. And
It was from necessity.
hmm, yeah,
Like, I had no role model or figure, um, and that's why I was so all in on Peterson's work for a long time,
hmm,
because that was, like, the spark that kicked off that search, and, I would have been, like, 19 by the time that came around,
yeah. It's like
maybe even older.
as with all legs up, uh, just looking at your own arc in relation to his work, it's like there's a period for which a particular source of inspiration can lift you and guide you. And then once you sort of peak out on that, then you start finding it less inspiring and then look for other sources of inspiration. But that sort of pattern of, wow, this is amazing, this is the answer, and then it peters out as it's more recently done to a degree in your life, as you've
Hmm,
described to me. And it's like, it's not that it's not
that's
a great
that's
answer.
rather interesting observation, because I feel in you saying that now, I've got many images flooding through my head where I very often clung to some leader, there's always a man, in their ideas. Not always, actually, now I say that, but most of the time. And, like, been very zealous about it, and then moved on and left that behind and done it again and again and again, um, bringing with me the useful things, but yeah, like, almost being ideological about it for a wee while, clinging to that identity, and then discarding it and moving on as I've grown past it.
Yes,
That's
so
probably happened a dozen times.
it's like, this is the answer I need right now, and then you cling to it because it is a deep need and it's a lifeline pulling you up, and you recognize the value in that, and then you sort of crest the wave that you're riding, and then it's like, oh, well, yeah, I know this already. I've learnt it. It's boring now. It's not the answer. And then you find another the answer, and it's more like you're finding the next rung on your ladder. And
Yeah, I think of it in terms of maps,
mm,
where, like, I encounter a thinker or an idea that explains the map of the world, and I'm like, "That fits perfectly, that answers all my questions." And then after 6 months, it's like, "Well, I've encountered enough anomalous things that don't fit into that map now that it's just I can't." And then I'll come across something else that incorporates all the anomalous stuff that I've encountered. It's like, bang, that's it.
mm.
No, no, no. On and on, and ever expanding outwards.
Yeah, because there's a temptation to look back at the thinkers you've, in a sense, outgrown and see their flaws and how they stopped living up to what you needed. But
Mm.
the thinkers who you're on toward the after a period on the journey would not have been what you needed when you were at the start of the journey.
Yeah, and I find that that's happening a lot less now because, well, I would say it's because the map I've got is so big and complex that there isn't, ideology doesn't work when you have enough information at your basis, because someone will come in and be like, here's the one answer, you only have to think this one thing. And it's like, sorry, it doesn't fly. It doesn't cover the domain. So it's hard for me to get wrapped up and follow even the most sophisticated thinkers now because it doesn't encompass the whole. I'm so spread thin in knowledge that it's like I can find a thing that works really well in this one area or on this one topic, but it can't encompass everything anymore.
But then you can still find new thoughts and thinkers who, while not being all encompassing, they can still extend the map on in one area, and you can have
Mm,
that doesn't
yeah,
apply over here,
like
but it does here.
I get value out of it now without
Hmm.
falling into the ideological trap.
I'm wondering if it's a process of maturation of, instead of growing, you're now becoming your own thinker. You're not just finding a different thinker to reflect.
Mm. Well, I'm hoping that's the case. You know, that statement of we all just think the thoughts of dead philosophers.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if that's the case until you become a philosopher yourself.
Yeah.
Although, you know, Nietzsche has some pretty hard objections about like even if you have a new idea, it's not you. You know, don't cling to it with such arrogance. You know, you wouldn't be able to have that thought if thousands of years of people living and dying and discussing things hadn't come beforehand to build the scaffolding on which you lay a tiny gem.
Hmm. Stand on the shoulders of giants. It's like the
Yeah.
reach that you make beyond where anyone else has reached, or anyone you're aware of, because other people have quite probably done the same thing and thought the same ways, and
Mm.
you're just not aware of them. But it's like that reach that you make, the reach you make should not be diminished, but you measure from your fingers to your feet, not to the feet of the giant you're standing on that's made up of all the thinkers before you.
Well, the other point about that Nietzsche was aiming at was um, it's not necessarily your reach. Like just because you happen to be the vessel in
Mm,
which the revelation comes through into articulated speech, it wasn't your work that did it. There's nothing about you in particular other than where you stand in history. His point was that these things evolve over time almost in and of themselves.
yeah, the
That it's not
idea has
actually
you.
you.
Mm,
Yes, yes, that's the point. It's not you who came up with it. It was something that was reached towards by some underlying spirit. I think there's probably a good, yeah, probably value to look at that through the Jungian lens.
mm,
That the collective unconscious was reaching in that way for who knows many thousands of years, and then you just happened to be the one person who stood at the right point in history where all of that reaching and expansion got chunked down into small enough pieces that it could fit into one mind, and then enough environmental circumstances that it clicked and became a word or an articulated thought.
mm.
It's still not you, it's just where you stand. How did we get onto that from my childhood?
Oh, I don't know, but it was good.
Okay.
But there's another part
Yeah,
that
well,
this links in well with the other thing that I remembered from our last conversation. Um, I talked about those who have been to war and returned and processed that experience as being immensely strong in character, and that those were the sorts of people that you want to be around because they will stand strong and support the whole. And you'd pointed out it was interesting that I'd said that I wanted to be they were the people to be near rather than the people to become. And
mm,
with what you've just described of your history, I can see that see to a degree where that would come from because I worked out that I was scared of paying the cost to get there. Like someone who's gone to war and come back and processed it has been through hell in one of the rawest senses we have in the physical world and come back, processed that experience, integrated it, and then moved forward with that. And that's a hell of a price to pay. And it was the
yeah.
fear of that price that was the reason I was saying that.
Well, I don't think you're mistaken because there is a price.
But I think that there's also an alternative to being thrown into hellfire and then either burning to death or coming out the other side and consuming the fire within yourself. Like you can choose to take a bite at a time, and rather than risking being destroyed, you die the little death every day voluntarily instead of dying all at once and quite possibly not surviving. You take on the
Yes.
challenge in front of you and
Yes, I think if you're
Mm,
thrown into the fire, you will be burnt.
mm.
You know, if you stumble across the dragon, it'll eat you. All of that. And that whole thing about, yes, you need to be forthright and you need to go out and confront it and beat it. But I think it's important to remember that it doesn't matter how forthright and conscious you are about it. You will pay the price for the wisdom or the strength or whatever it is you're hoping to attain from the underworld. Like I don't think you can gain the prize without paying the price. And it does damage you. I don't think there's a way you can do it without it damaging you psychologically. Yeah.
I guess I'm feeling after thinking on it that there's now I want to work out how to phrase this right. It's not escaping from the price, but instead of paying the price all at once in advance and then slowly squeezing the value out of that terrible experience, you can buy it a penny at a time, deliberately and actively. And it's like you can pay the price you can afford instead of everything you have. And if you don't have enough, then you die psychologically in some real sense.
Mm,
You find dragons you can beat instead of a dragon that can certainly beat you finding you, and if you're lucky you survive. It's like you can find a little dragon to beat and then
yeah.
yeah, the
You
slow
don't want to
path.
walk into the fire not knowing what you're going into.
But you don't need to walk into all of it at once. And that was the thing that I realized afterwards, the path there that you can willingly walk on, or at least that I'm personally more ready to walk on.
I think there's real truth in that. I think also you want to be careful that it's not being used as a justification or that your fear is not using that as an excuse of, I don't know. I've just got a sense that there's probably a certain part of, I don't want to say you, but a person who is in this position, perhaps you,
Who thinks they found an easy
who
out?
yeah, who is using that thought process as a as an excuse to not look too deeply, right now, I'll do it tomorrow, kind of philosophy.
Hmm.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but I think it's something to pay attention to within yourself if you're going to do it that way. That that it is a convenient story for the part of you that doesn't want to pay the price.
Well, the paying the price of the dragon finding you is involuntary. The paying the price a piece at a time is going out in search of small dragons to slay. And while you might do it very
Yeah,
hesitantly and slowly and only find small ones, and you might get stuck in that and not actually make any progress because you're only finding dragons you can squash.
that's what I mean.
Hmm.
That's what I
Yeah.
mean. You don't want to be finding dragons the size of a cat that you can kill instantly. Like
Hmm.
that's not challenging. You need to find ones that you can beat, but just. I'm going to rip something off Peterson here that I heard him say once, and he only said it once, which I thought was really interesting. And he talked about a dream that he had. The dream was he went to heaven, and he got let in. And he opened the gates and everything, and he walked straight into a coliseum. And God and Jesus and all that were up in the coliseum, and he was down there as a contender, standing face to face with the devil, and he had to fight him to the death, which is a little intimidating. I think he won in the dream, and then he goes to God and he's like, "What the fuck? What was that about?" He said, "Because you could win. That's why you had to fight him." but it's not easy to do. You know, if you're out there facing dragons that I think intelligent people do this a lot, which is why they like to argue because they feel like they can win easily. You know, they go out and argue with someone stupid and just like, "Oh, I destroyed him. Aren't I so smart?" You wanna do something that's right on the edge. If the dragon doesn't scar you, the dragon wasn't big enough. But it can't be terrifying, and it can't paralyze you, otherwise it's too big.
But even if the dragon's too big to beat, even if you misjudge yourself and find yourself beaten by a dragon, that's going out and finding a dragon will normally be better than accidentally having a dragon of hell stumble upon you. And people come out of
Yeah.
hellfire and can put themselves together stronger. So the worst that can happen if you find a dragon you can't beat is it's don't go into it foolishly, but
I I think
yeah.
I think honestly, if you're looking for dragons to beat and you're starting with the easiest to beat dragons, like, this is all analogy, of course. If you're looking for problems in the world and a massive amount of them appear to you, but you start doing them from the easiest up,
Hmm.
I don't think you'll ever fail to beat any of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Find the
problem
easiest
is
dragon you
when you
need
don't,
to
yeah.
beat. If you go out finding the
Yeah.
dragons you don't need to beat and just have fun kicking the
Well,
dragons you search
it's
out.
not that. It's not that because there
Hmm.
can be dragons that you need and want to beat, but they're like the big dragons, and
Hmm.
there's little ones right at your feet that you're ignoring.
Hmm.
Then yeah, then you'll get eaten by the big dragon. But I think if you start with the little ones and just work your way up, like that's the whole clean your room thing. I think it's like
Hmm.
you do what's right in front of you, the littlest dragon, right? The next one's slightly bigger, kill that one. Next one's slightly bigger. No, no, no. It grows, and as the size of the dragon, the problem, grows, so do you. But if you go
Hmm.
straight to the big one, it just flattens you. And the other side of that is if you ignore dragons altogether, you know, if you go like, I'm not going to look for problems, that's when they come and find you and eat you. Because, problems show up and they compound and grow until they eat you whole.
So even if you at this point and quite possibly for a very long time have no chance of beating the biggest dragons, if you're even aware of them, by taking on the everyday dragons and doing that deliberately. That's the key bit. It's not just hiding from them and taking them out from the cornered animal sense of I have to get this done. I have to clean this room. I have to cook the dinner. I have to do this thing. Um, then the forces from outside yourself. But if you can make that force within yourself, that is the thing to take out a dragon that you don't aren't compelled to beat from outside, but you're choosing to confront and fight yourself. A small choosing to fight and confront a small dragon is possibly worth more than defeating a larger dragon that you're compelled to fight. It's like the kid who's working really hard at school because their parents don't give them an option. They will do it or they will suffer the consequences.
Yeah, it's not
Versus,
great for them.
yeah, that's not building them up. That's squashing them
No,
into
they
something.
they're almost more fragile,
Mm.
you know. And people like that often crack one day when things are too hard and just fall apart and run away.
Mm. So fighting the small dragon of I'm going to make this desk clear. I'm going to put away one thing somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm going to make
I'm
it
not
that
great
much
at
better.
that in my own life, to be honest. Um, for me, it's sort of like it builds and it builds, and then I get frustrated, and then I just go and do everything in one go, and then I'm just shattered,
Mm.
and I feel really bad. But I am really good at it in relationships. I think that's why I was able to save my wife because whenever there was something that bothered me or something that was wrong, it's like I noticed that shit instantly, and I brought it up instantly, and I never let it go.
Mm.
And no matter how tiny it was like, "This thing just happened, and I didn't like it. We're gonna fucking talk about that and make sure it doesn't happen again." Or, like and it wasn't just a, "The thing shouldn't happen" kind of conversation. A lot of times it became, "Why was I upset about that?" And then digging into, my own issues and trauma and going, "Ah, it's that." And then that helps.
Hmm. So you're not coming
Like,
out as accusatory, like you did this thing that was wrong. It's
no, it's
I was
a
upset by
thing.
this.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was upset a thing happened. Um, it's a hard line to walk, really hard one. And, that's why my wife and I battled for 4 years on that hit. I think we mentioned it on the show, but yeah, she was, dark tetrad, whatever traits. She was narcissist and all of that,
Hmm.
psychopathic, sadistic, and Machiavellian. Is it instrumental, like using people as instruments? All of
Hmm.
that. And it was a hard battle, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, um, I'm not entirely sure why or how I managed to stop being that and change. I kind of wish I could know, but I'm hoping that that had something to do with it. And we fought a lot because of that, like a lot. But things did improve over time. It was a trajectory upwards consistently, and things always were better after a fight. There was a lot of fights, and I honestly think that I've lost years of my life from cortisol stress because of her and all of that problems. And she knows that, and she's doing her best to help me with my issues now that she's well put together. Um, which is great. It's really helpful.
Hmm.
Because I have a lot of issues, but it's really nice to not be having to deal with my issues and her issues and children. Whereas now it's like I actually can try and work through my stuff, and I have her help and support with that. And I only have that because because I did everything I could to fix her first.
Yeah. I wonder if,
Not quite sure where to go with that.
well, I was thinking we could, you brought up your own issues, and we'd been talking earlier about um, going into the money issues resulting from your childhood in a
Mm,
psychological sense.
yeah, that could be good.
Might be a good segue.
I'm not. I have issues with money. I'm good at earning it, so that's like helpful. Um, but I think there's also something there to do with always needing to be useful in order to feel loved, something like that. I asked you about it a couple days ago because you are very good with money. Um, to the point where I sort of give you a bit of a hard time about how frugal you are. To do with you know the whole finding a partner thing, which is a bit in tongue in cheek, but I have a vague point there, but that's not topic for today. Like you've paid off your student loans, um, on being a single dad, and you've got money stacked away, and we're in the classic situation. You put the two of us next to you, and you look at the lifestyle and the assets of the two of us, and you'd say that I am more wealthy than you. Um, which maybe I earn more. I don't actually know how much you earn,
I'd be
but
okay to discuss it off camera, off recording.
that's fine. Um,
Yeah.
but the case is that you are far more well off financially than I am. Like I have a lot of things and assets and stuff, but they're not, you know, investment assets, and I'm still basically paycheck to paycheck, and I have debt.
Mm.
Whereas I know for a fact that's not you.
Yeah, I think I had good role models financially growing up. My parents were always good with money. Mum kept a detailed track of the expenses. Like this was um, before internet banking, so it was like, okay, here's the receipts, writing down on a spreadsheet what we've spent that week or something, and so tracking it all and so on. And Dad was earning well, but we never bought new. Well, bought clothes new, but still went to the secondhand shop for clothes and always buy a secondhand car because the depreciation in the first few years is not worth it.
Mm.
And like there was no value attached to something being new. So I perceive something as second when it's second hand, it's got an additional value of, oh, if it was going to break a week after you buy it, it would have already broken. So it's already proven itself as having some durability. And you look around and you can find stuff that has that and
I think it's
can
interesting to think of role models for me
hmm,
because my mum was poor. We never had money. I don't she wasn't impulsive, she didn't have any of the problems with money that I do. But at the same time, I don't think she ever really, like, talked to me about money,
hmm,
but she was also consistently stressed about money. Um, like, I didn't eat very well growing up. Um, but we did have things, like, she did buy things. Um, yeah, I think she went out somewhat often, but, you know, I didn't.
but she modeled that
Maybe,
because
but it was never a conversation. Like, I
hmm,
didn't know the details of money. I didn't know anything about it, really. And I get the feeling that a lot of my bad habits are things that I picked up from media rather than from my family
hmm,
or from a lack of modeling maybe.
yeah, that makes sense because I remember oh, how to put it, disparaging comments about ads for the latest device, like a sort of oh another Pokephone or oh go oh there was it comments about oh gotta go buy more stuff, gotta spend more on the credit card and in a ironic sense about ads to buy stuff like with the ads for lots of Christmas toys like oh gotta throw out last year's toys and buy new ones and so it was not so much discussed but it was pointed and laughed at.
Hmm. Yeah, because I think now that I think about it, I think I got like new toys every year for Christmas. But I
Hmm.
also know that I was hungry a lot. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's like
It's hard to
yeah.
think about how it relates to the way that I am now with money. I think for me, it's just like I feel very stressed about having control over money.
Hmm.
So, like, if my wife wants me to get her something and I had other plans with the money, I get upset. And like, I can't pay too close of attention to what she's doing with the money she gets from her income. Um, Otherwise, I feel like it's like not used the way that I would want it to be used,
Hmm.
something like that. And I wonder if there's something there from my mum to do with, you know, if I ask her something for something or something like that.
Because it's the pattern that you described with your mum and how she spent sounds similar to the pattern with how you're spending. Not that it was discussed, but it's imitated.
Mm.
The At least the
Yeah, like
way it sounded to me.
yeah. I mean, she had friends and she went out and she drank, so she spent money on that. Um, our house, it wasn't like nicely furnished. Well, I think we had all old secondhand stuff, which like she did buy things for herself, but I don't think she was irresponsible with like technology or items. Like I think she was too poor for any of that. It's really hard to tell from memories. Like I know she had a laptop, but I think she had it for a long time. There were phones, but they were all flip phones back in the day.
The things you described her spending on,
I think they were new. I think all of the things were new,
hmm,
but they weren't often.
but you talked about her going
She,
out a fair bit and
I,
drinking.
I think that was a fair bit of like going out and eating out,
Mm.
that kind of thing.
I wonder if that might have been the stress relief, the vent of the internal pressure.
She was a very stressed person when I was young,
Mm.
and perhaps she found comfort in spending money because I find comfort in spending money. Like that. My trouble is that I don't remember a lot of my childhood. I infer backwards with a lot of my issues. Like I know that I have an addict personality where I experience a lot of stress and then I get stress relief from indulging in bad things. And I know what causes that in childhood, vaguely, but it's not like I remember any abuse. But at the same time, it's like I wouldn't be like this if there wasn't something wrong. It's hard to know.
I
Like
wonder if
I've worked on so many of my vices. Like I don't drink anymore. You know, I've nearly drank myself to death a dozen or more times in my life. I don't do drugs anymore, of which I did far too many in far unsafe circumstances. I still play video games, but I feel like that's somewhat looked after now. And my wife plays as well now that I got into it, so it's sort of a thing that we share. Um, but there is a certain addiction to spending money for me on technology, on buying food instead of cooking it, on anything. If I have money, I want to spend it right down until I have nothing.
I wonder if free association would be useful in the sense of I try and think of something that might be useful, and then you give the association with it, the impulsive
What do
one.
you mean?
Like if I say safe, what comes up?
Safe,
Hmm.
a physical safe.
Yeah.
Uh, that might be off though, because I've been thinking about that recently.
Okay. Well, we're talking about free association on the topic we've been thinking and talking about, so that's kind of the point.
Okay, well, I've been thinking about physical safes and stacking, you know, silver in them. So that's what that comes up in my mind.
Hmm. So what
Well, I've
come?
been thinking about how to solve these problems. I don't know.
Hmm.
Maybe that word is one that won't be particularly helpful.
Let's just run with things and see what comes
All right,
up.
all right. Oh yeah, I'll let you go.
Yeah.
Apologies.
What about release? Like stress relief.
Food. Something sweet, something not good for me.
What about
Eating
enough?
things I enjoy. Yeah. Being sick after eating too many sweet things.
Okay, so I'm not a psychologist, so I can't do a whole bunch of these and then come to a conclusion. So let's go over them. For safe, it was a physical safe for how to store money. Because
Yeah.
I'd conceived
Something
of
locked that I can't get into.
I'd conceived of it as safety of yourself. Like, where are you safe? But of course, the context
Um,
we've been talking about would color it, as you said. But it's like
yeah.
keep the money
Safety.
safe from you.
Safety would be like in the smallest possible space, like alone in a room with my things, food, entertainment, technology, something I want to do, and no one else.
And then enough was when you've eaten so much you can't have any more.
Specifically, like that's enough, like too much kind of thing.
So too much is enough.
When you said enough, I thought of the feeling of wanting to throw up after having eaten too much, and the statement of like that's enough, I can't have any more.
What about possessions? Isn't the association?
I just think of the definition of that, like a room with lots of things in it.
Hmm.
It might be interesting to note that I didn't have the greatest teenage life. Um, as you probably can imagine, my high school experience was not fantastic.
Hmm.
Um, and I found no escape in the real world. I wasn't happy at home either. There was nowhere in the world where I was happy. And I started to have some money. I think it was, I don't know, allowance or whatever, or asking for money. And I would disappear into video games and I would buy things that make me feel good. And that was the only escape I had in the world. And I think I would do that every opportunity I got. There was a particular game that I liked that was just like an absolutely beautiful little world landscape walking around. And I would play that for as many hours as I physically could before I fell asleep, just looking at the beautiful world and like feeling safe. Yeah, feeling safe and feeling happy. And I would, have junk food to fuel that because it tasted good and it made me feel good. And there was nothing else in my life that made me feel good.
I wonder if part of you, or almost certainly a part of you, is still that age.
There's very few things that make me happy in life. I think I think also that I repressed so many other emotions from the pain of them that I have difficulty experiencing emotions, period. Because I noticed that I won't feel unless the stimulus is so overwhelming that it like boils underneath. It feels like there's a thin layer of something that's like locking everything under it, and I feel stuff boiling under there, but it's not quite connected to me. And then if the situation is intense enough that it'll just like crack and flood through, and I'll, like break down and start crying and actually feel something. And then as soon as it starts, like 10, 20 seconds later, it's just stopped, gone again. Even if I want it to keep going, it'll stop itself. Like the process of suppressing emotions is automated at this point.
So their emotions are all still there.
I can sense that they're there and I can kind of feel them, but it doesn't feel like I'm feeling them. It feels like they're beneath my conscious experience.
Can you converse with them?
Not while they're underneath.
So you're only
Like
aware
when
of.
they come through,
Mm,
I can express something and get something out of it, but it's very minimal.
express as in to the outside world?
It's an inner dialogue,
Mm,
kind of,
yeah, that's what I
but it,
was.
it takes a lot of effort and it's
Mm.
really hard to do. I have a very short amount of time to do it in. Um, I haven't been able to consciously break through the layer without finding a memory associated with the particular feeling I'm looking for underneath. And I think also a lot of my memories are down there too.
Mm.
I'm starting to get the real sense that there is like repressed layer of my being and a large amount of it that I'm just sitting on top of. And whatever or whenever that happened is also down there. So it's like I'm not doing it. It's been done. And I don't feel like I have the access to whatever memory started the process or continues the process.
The only
All
th
right.
the only thing that I am aware of, not being a professional in any way, but um, so to draw from my own experience, I've always had trouble understanding my emotions. It's like, oh, here's an emotion. Now, what are you? And like after leaving my ex, I was actively working through things, and I'd have emotion, and it's like, okay, what is this? And so I've done a fair bit of journaling, like internal conversations written down, and from what I've read about it, there's an element of trust that your subconscious needs to build up in being listened to. And I've had some surprising conversations with other layers of myself where I write down a question and have an answer, and then after practicing this for a while, I can do it as a conversation in my head. But the process of treating those inner layers that hide all these things like a person whose trust you need to gain, and then start off at first the conversations will be useless, but once those subconscious layers learn that they can trust you to actually listen instead of just repressing whatever tidbit they feel comfortable enough to express, which would be useless for a lot of the time, then they'll reveal more, and in a conversation manner, not in a here is all the feelings, but it's a this made me feel uncomfortable. It was like, what's on your mind today? The coin. What's wrong with the coin? It hurt. What? Why did the coin hurt? She threw it at me. Just to put together a theoretical sequence that could come out, and then that
I
can lead somewhere.
I think I'm scared of doing that. And trouble is that I believe all of that. Like, I fully believe that there is something conscious in the unconscious that's not me. And I think that goes for all people, by the way. Um, I think I'm scared of what I might find
Sounds justified.
because I know that there's something not good there. Like I know, and I know that because of the way I am, and because of how fucked the memories that I have are. Like I've got some pretty bad memories that I remember, and then there's some pretty big gaps that I don't, and I really am afraid of what's there. Um, I guess that's the only way to say it. Like, I know this thing's to be fact. I've known for a long time that that's how you learn things from down underneath. I've engaged with this with my wife, being the person who asked her subconscious the questions and had a conversation with her, and then through that she's learned. Like I've recently helped her integrate her shadow by doing this method, by embodying mine and then having a conversation with her, which is an interesting conversation that we could have at another time about that to do with relationships. We learned a whole bunch of stuff that way that was rather fascinating and completely not something that people talk about. Um, and yet I won't do it with myself. And my brain's flooding me with all kinds of excuses, but I think honestly it's just fear that I'm scared of whatever might be down there.
I wonder
And yet
if
I use excuses like it's not the time or I don't have time to not do it. Yeah, sorry.
I wonder oh, if you could embody who the you who's the aspect of yourself that's still stuck in those darkest places that are hidden from being too dark. I wonder if you could embody who you would have needed then and like take the memories you remember and the aspects of yourself that you have access to and bring them out, not going any deeper necessarily, but just like here's the love that you so desperately needed. And I suspect your wife could help you with this too. And it's a hell
Yeah,
of a dragon to slay. The dragons that live inside are some
but
of the hardest of all.
that's not a bad thought of trying to re-inhabit the younger version that felt those things and then have a conversation with my wife.
Mm.
I feel like I've kind of been doing that anyway, subconsciously. Like for a long time, I needed a lot of like verbal statements of love from her and validation, but I found it didn't really do anything. Like maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know, but it never felt better after the statement. I was never, able to be held tight enough.
I wonder if the you that needs to be held tight Maybe the you in those memories.
Maybe.
'Cause I've found that,
Yeah, hell of an internal exploration process.
yeah, I've found
And I've
that,
been really clinging
yeah,
to the idea of doing it chemically instead of having to do it
that sounds like an
physically.
easy escape that doesn't work.
Well, when I say chemically, I mean like psychedelic chemically, not prescription chemically. Like
That
the door would be opened and I would be forced to have to deal with it all, and there would be no running away.
that's pushing yourself into the hellfire one way.
Yeah, like I'm just thinking about this now. I've noticed that I've been real into that idea for a while and super bullish on it. And I'm wondering if that might be a bit of a, I don't know, a crutch or an excuse of like, I don't have to do this on my own. I'll just wait until psychedelic therapy is the standard. And then I can just go and do it. It'd be a lot easier if I could do it through the help of this chemical, this plant. And while those things may be true, that's a case of like, I don't want to face the dragon. Here's an excuse not to do it now.
Mm. And if the psychedelic therapy came along and you knew that it would bring you to face everything that you've been hiding from at once, I feel like there'd be another reason not to.
Maybe. But I have played out the scenario in my head, and I know if it was legal, I'd go tomorrow.
Mm.
Well, I'm not sure why I would do that, and I wouldn't sit down on my own and like try and go through these things. Like I've been thinking about just going to the therapy standard and doing it that way. Obviously, that's scary for the same reasons.
I wonder if there's something like the memories that we're talking about are probably from a time when you were essentially helpless on your own.
Yeah.
And you're talking about not being able to face these things on your own and wanting a help and a crutch to face them.
Hmm. That's interesting.
But the you that was helpless and on your own is a someone that you can be the support to, and you
Right.
have love around you to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's not me. Part of me, but not me.
Helpless one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've grown beyond that
If there's
a lot.
one thing I could say about you, it would not be that you were helpless.
I appreciate that.
So
Whatever way that I may be broken has been somewhat useful.
the you that you've managed to become to present in the present, I would say is more formidable than helpless.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that was like a conscious decision of that I've forgotten because I'm sort of obsessive with self-development. Not the greatest at implementing it. Like I'm not very disciplined at exercise or whatever, for example. Although in saying that compared to the average person, I probably am. So depends on how you want to think about it or who you compare yourself to, I suppose.
Yeah, someone
But
who
in terms of sorry,
I was going to say someone with OCD who ignores it half the time is almost normal.
hmm, Yeah, maybe. That sounds way too accurate. Um, hmm, um, yeah, that does sound like me. I'm rather OCD, but I just can't be bothered all the time until it gets so fucking annoying that I have to do it, and then I'm angry about it. Um,
Who are you angry at? Is it the
it's either my wife or my mum.
mm,
Hard to know, because I know I have problems from both. But probably the answer is both, one and then the other. It wouldn't be like such a sore spot if it wasn't already ingrained that way.
so you feel anger about doing the things that you feel compelled to do, and that anger is directed at your wife and your mum?
Yeah, the things that I feel I shouldn't have to, that are left to me. So I got sidetracked with something I wanted to say.
Mm.
Sorry, what were we talking about before we interjected with this?
being the being who you didn't have at an earlier time
Oh,
for that aspect
development.
of yourself. Mm.
Development. Yeah, I said that I wondered if there was a conscious decision to be a better version of myself that I've since forgotten because I'm rather obsessive with acquiring knowledge. Um,
This sounds familiar to me.
yeah, I have my headphones on between 8 and 13 hours a day, something like that, and it's never music. It's always a book or a podcast that I find interesting. Some of it's entertainment, but not much. And if it is, I start to get annoyed with it, and then I start to transition into more pure information. Like my quest for obtaining information to make myself wiser and more knowledgeable. Something that started in my teens sometime and it's just never stopped.
Does having more information make you more powerful?
Yeah, I certainly feel superior to people around me,
Who do you feel
and that
inferior
might have
to?
something to. Uh, that's an uncomfortable question.
That's what we're here for.
I have not met people for many years who I have felt inferior to. I'm wondering, seeing as you've made that statement, that perhaps I set myself up to be in a position where I never felt less than anyone else because I was made to feel less than everyone else by everyone else for all
Mm.
of my life. I just had a memory pop into my head and mentioning that. I remember stating to someone, I think this was late high school, that I had never once had an interaction with anyone in my whole existence that wasn't derogatory towards me. Like there wasn't a person I'd ever met who didn't put me down.
Do you think
And as a note for those listening, I'm a very, very short man, like the shortest you've ever met kind of man. I'm not, what do you say, I'm not a dwarf or anything like that. I'm not deformed. So it's not an off the table kind of insult. Um, so it's something everyone brings up. And when I was that age, before I was in the adult world, it was never in a polite way. And even the adults do it, and family and everyone. And I seem to remember, I don't remember who I was talking to, saying that I'd never had anyone in my life who didn't do that, who looked down upon me, who didn't look down upon me from something that I had no control over.
So you seized the only way you could to make yourself more.
Perhaps. I think it's also interesting worth noting, as I think I also said in the same sentence, about I had the same feeling with people betraying me as well, betraying my trust. That I had never had anyone who didn't betray my trust, family and parents included, including all of my friends and everyone I talked to. Which would explain a lot of my trust issues with my marriage. But I'm like looking for the example of being betrayed because I've never not had that happen.
So if you could talk to your 15-year-old or 10-year-old self, just have a conversation and express to that self what you thought of them, what would you say?
On this topic,
Whatever comes to mind.
problem is that he's not wrong. Not deceiving himself, he's not playing petty games. That he's correct in that memory. Um, and even at the time, I knew one day that wouldn't be the case. And that's today for me. And it's not like it has been for a while. It's, you know, probably less than a year, depending on the relationships you want to count. Probably less than 6 months, and I'm 25 now. And I knew at the time that like one day it'll be better. No, I held on to the hope. Um, I'm still suspicious of all of the things. Just because adults are more polite doesn't mean that they're better. They still think the same things and talk about it without me. They just don't say it to my face. That's not, you know, nicer, I suppose, but it's not exactly different. Um, I don't know. I probably just say it gets better. That one day you'll grow beyond all of the children that you're around, and you'll be in a world of actual adults and be treated like an actual adult. But you have to wait 10 years, and it won't be pleasant.
One thing that does,
And
sorry, you go.
it's all well and good for me on this end to say that it's worth it, because I don't have to go through it again. It's all well and good for me to sit here and go like, well, I don't remember half of that, and I know it was terrible, but it was all worth it because life's great for me now. But to tell someone who has to walk through what I walked through for 10 years, day by day and hour by hour, that's, it's a hard pitch.
Hmm.
And I couldn't do it with like a smile on my face and saying it's all going to be okay.
And
Wasn't pleasant.
yet the you of that time still had the strength and potential to come so far. How many can look back and know that they had that within them then?
I don't think that I could say that it was strength or potential that got me through those times.
Hmm.
I think a lot of it was just dumb luck. Like thinking back upon the times that I purposefully went out to do dumb things and risk my life, like I could have died 20 times over easily. And it wasn't through any virtue of my own that I didn't. Like I don't remember all of the times that I nearly died then. Too many of them. I didn't actively, you know, attempt and make an attempt, but I put myself in enough situations where the risk was fairly high enough that one day it would happen. And I did it consciously.
Was
Like I know
there
if I sat across the table from him at that age, that he knows all the things I would say to him.
hmm,
Because I thought long and hard about this when I was that age. I knew what my life was. I knew how long it would be until it got better. And I knew that it wasn't going to be pleasant.
because that
I'm
you,
sorry.
I suspect that you is still there inside you, and like the idea of if you could bring him to the now and not have to send him back, so he could, that aspect of yourself can come out of the dark because
I don't think that he is in the dark. I think that I'm him. That whatever's pushed down into the dark was something that I did along the way on purpose. Or I have a feeling it might be from earlier, from before I was him
is there a
in
sense of
childhood.
deserving something? Because there's a lot of self-destructive stuff you've talked about and a lot of potential for harm to yourself that you've talked about engaging in, and just wondering whether, because you talked about it being deliberate, quite, at least it sounded quite clearly as these are things that you chose to do and knowing the risks involved. And
I didn't expect myself to live to 20.
did you want yourself to live to 20?
What do I now? Did I? Wouldn't then? No,
Why not?
because I didn't like life. It felt like torture every day.
Yeah, fair enough.
And the only thing that didn't was not real, was the computer game that I liked. Um, it's funny when you say think about him across the table. I really strongly identify with him. I don't feel like he's a different person at all. But it's hard to think back beyond before him when I was a child. That's where the gaps are in my memory. The transition between childhood and him.
Because
That's where the gap is.
I'm just thinking that
Needs are
he's
different.
he's still there now, like within your psyche. You talk about strongly identifying with that you, and that the you of that time already knew the sorts of things that you'd want to say to him now because you'd thought about it then, and that he's still living it. He never left. And I'm wondering, to continue on the idea of you being who you needed then, what would it take to rescue that part of yourself from that? Because he doesn't need to keep living there. So
Mm,
he's
it's
been
interesting. You
through
keep
it.
saying him, and I keep feeling I.
What do you need to be rescued?
Well, you said that he's still living there, and my brain went, I'm still living there.
So if you're still living there, who do you
I
need
haven't
to
let go
rescue
of
you?
that time.
Sorry?
It feels like I haven't let go of that time. That so much of who I am is from that fire, from that, from those years.
Yeah, I was
But
getting
I
that
haven't moved
impression.
beyond it.
Yeah. Man, if we were in the same room, I think I'd give you a hug.
Sure, I bet you. I have a wife for that. No, I'm alright. Trying to figure it out.
I know you feel,
I'd give him a hug.
yeah, I think he deserved it.
I'm not sure if that's an interesting statement. I'm not sure which of us would have more sympathy for the other. Because he may be bitter and jaded and be, halfway in the beginning of it all, halfway through it. But I've been through it all. That's interesting. The me that I have across the table is the one that's halfway through, not the one before it starts.
He was the one who had some ability to fight back. Before that, he didn't.
He was the one who realized what the situation was.
So before that, it was just hell. It wasn't something that could be conceptualized and understood in any way. It was just what it was. And how do you cope with something you can't cope with? You don't. You just do.
Sounds about right.
You just do the present.
It wasn't long after. When I say halfway through, he was still right at the start, but he was.
But years feel longer when you're younger.
I think that's an understatement for this situation. I was gonna say that he might have been a year, 2 years, probably 2 years older than the first encounter with this change. Um, but he feels 10 years older in mentality from the child. The last of the child and the first of the, I wanna say broken man. I think it I don't think you can be what a teenager is if you don't enjoy those times. I think that you just have to skip it. You can't, you know, enjoy in the rebellious act then if you can't revel in it. Then you become cynical and bitter. And I think that ages you instantly. And I mentioned I didn't have any trouble in childhood and primary school at school. I loved school. It was an escape from my home, um, which I wasn't super, happy with, I think, just because I was bored and lonely. Um, and I enjoyed school. I was an equal with everyone. And there wasn't, maybe there was, but status games weren't as big of a thing. And then even in intermediate, it wasn't too bad. I still enjoyed it. But when high school came around, when people stopped being kind and nice to each other, and all of a sudden it was a den of vipers and not a like group of kind kids. And it was all status games. It was all who was better than who wasn't, and it was all explicit and out in the open. It wasn't, in the background like an adult world. It was stated without fear. That was the transition from thinking that the childhood world was the world, and then the confrontation with the status hierarchy and the jostling and the sexual selection, power games, corruption, all of that. Perhaps even evil might have been my first confrontation with that as well.
I wonder if the you were referring to from that time, how old was he? 15?
Oh, earlier, I mean, 12, 13, when it began,
Hmm.
maybe a little younger.
Well,
I started picking up on it, like, even in intermediate, so I don't know, 11. But yeah, it probably kicked into full force when I was probably 13.
hmm. I'm wondering if the you who you talked about sitting across from you at the table, who you felt had sympathy for you of now,
He's 15 or so, I'd say. A
yeah,
couple of years into it. Feels like me. Doesn't feel like a child.
I wonder if within your psyche, because he's a whole lot closer to whatever's in the blank spaces, and I wonder if he knows what's there,
That's an interesting thought.
and like he's between you and that,
Like he's
and
the stopgap. He's the
yeah,
defense.
he might be able to help you go one
But he is the
step,
defense.
sort of pull the defenses back by one step, not open
But
them up,
yeah,
but
he is the defense.
mm,
He's the me that I created to defend myself against the world. And I have an association with him and not with the child because who I am is built upon him, not what created him.
and if that's your focus to defend against the world, it makes sense to
Oh, shit.
seek as much as you can to do that with.
Damn it, that has to be right because he's like smiling at me. All that I am is just a very, very elaborate scaffolding I've built upon a defense mechanism for a cruel teenage world before the politeness and consequences of the adult world was imposed. For the consequences of like you losing your job or being ostracized from the community for being a cunt to everyone. That means that I'm not who I am. Maybe that's why I struggle with knowing who I am and struggle with identity so much. Because I'm not my true identity. I'm the armor. That's why I don't feel anything. Because I am the armor. And I've built the intellectual scaffolding and learned all that I could so that I feel real.
But that scaffolding is still a part of the you as a whole. But at the moment, it's the whole it's the you that gets presented that gets to act as the scaffolding than the armor.
Yeah. Yeah, I was built as a suit of armor and I became prison.
Can
I've separated too much. I don't need to discard who I am and who I've become,
mm,
but I need to break the barrier so that I can reintegrate. I know that the younger part of me comes out when I play because I can be very silly. And I do that a lot with my wife and the joke. And I know that that's real because it's spontaneous. Spontaneous. So it's not like I'm completely divorced.
but you needed to build a bridge over a certain time.
Yeah. I was designed to take the hits.
Does the you that you built to protect yourself, the 15-year-old you sitting across the table, does that you want to help?
Yeah.
Does he have any idea what we should do? Where we should go with this?
I think so. But I don't think he wants to say because he knows that him and I aren't the only ones at the table right now.
Is there anyone else who wants to talk?
It means you.
Does this need to be just the two of you without me involved?
I'm guessing so. But he's happy
Would he?
that.
Sorry, you go.
No, you asked your question.
Just wondering if your wife, if he'd want her help on this.
maybe. Said have to meet her. I think that that's as far as we'll be able to go today. But to bring it up and make it a bit more light-hearted before we close, I think it's worth mentioning. Perhaps we could do this next time, but I'll make the statement now anyway. I think it's worth us having a conversation about the idea of the different parts of ourselves in general.
In addition to what we had before about um, the room full of selves, like an orchestra or a congress or a senate.
I think that it's too abstract.
Yeah.
Today might be a good example for people. I feel like I'm running away a little bit from where we dug to, but
Yeah.
I think that I need to actually just dig on my own and do more of that myself. Though I did rather enjoy doing this with you at the table, so maybe I'll do it more. And I
Yeah.
think that should be enough for today.
Well, if
And we
he
can
d
have the intellectual discussion as a start next time about the idea of having conversations with different parts of yourselves. As I have a lot of examples that I've done recently with my wife and things that I've learned from that that might be interesting on the conceptual level.
Before we move entirely on,
Mm.
oh, I want to give the the you sitting across the table a hug, or at least that intention, that emotion.
That's cute. I don't think him and I are quite that type of person.
High five then.
A nod is enough.
Uh,
One thing that I have truly learned with engaging with different parts of me and with my wife, they're generally really funny. There's something about they're so devoid from the intellectual realm. They're just who they are. That they're really good at humor. You know, if you want to laugh out loud like a crazy person, have a conversation with a part of yourself in an honest way.
yep, that rings bells.
Yeah, great to joking. And you can do it with other people. You can let those parts of you have control of speaking, and then you can have a conversation with a different part of someone else as well if they do the same. And then those two entities can interact and talk, and you get to hear it and observe, which was, yeah, fascinating. I did that with my wife. We let our shadows talk to each other, and that resolved a hell of a lot of issues that we had with each other in like one sitting. That could be something we talk about next time. I think that might be rather interesting for you in particular.
Yep.
The relationship stuff we figured out from that.
Yeah, which is a whole big thing that I'm trying to work out, but yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Well, it's going to be funny. I've been trying to convince my wife to listen to these for quite a while since we changed up and went to this different mode.
mm,
But this one is going to be a requirement, I think.
mm,
Just so I don't have to re-explain it all, and then I can get her to help.
mm.
Oh, I think I should go before I get too emotional.
Yeah, go have a nice conversation with that very impressive aspect of yourself.
Appreciate the compliment. It's funny, we feel like two halves of the same person. We feel like the same person just at the beginning and the end
Mm,
of our function. It's interesting when I've talked to my wife's different parts. they're very different from her, and they feel kind of alien to her. But him and I, we recognise each other as the same. There's almost a respect there that we don't have for anyone else.
Mm. And do you feel like the time to be a suit of armor m may be at an end, or the t time to entirely be a suit of armor?
Yeah, it's time to end.
Mm.
It's not helping with the children, causing trouble.
But there's definitely a place for armor and that kind of strength to protect the family.
Oh, I don't think that's ever going away, and I wouldn't have it in a way that we go away,
Mm.
but it needs to be, I don't know, maybe taking the back seat now,
Mm.
or dissolving into a greater whole.
Yeah.
This can't be all that we are. We thank you for your help.
Well, I'm glad I could fumble something helpful.
Well, stupid questions are good questions. I think there's some real value in just asking the first thing. That point of like, there's no such thing about stupid questions. Well, yes, there are, but they're actually really useful.
Mm. I'm
I
looking
can get good answers.
I'm looking forward to when we can record face to face.
Yeah, it's next week, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Be interesting. We're getting
Although,
our wedding vows renewed because of all of the aforementioned issues with my wife and I's past.
mm,
So he's going to come down and we'll get to catch up.
yeah, though we might do another recording tomorrow, which would mean it would be spaced out by another week.
I think a second part of this might be rather useful. I was intending to just do today, but because I work tomorrow, but I think one more of these on the same topic might be incredibly valuable. Depends if he'll be open to. I think we could do it. Yeah. I almost feel kind of crazy talking about me and the different parts of me and referring them to as other people, because that's something that our culture just doesn't talk about.
Mm,
But I'm fairly confident that it's true.
true.
The Congress idea that we have, I think it's more, I don't know, you're all sitting at a table of equals, and you just happen to be the person who's got the microphone.
Mm,
But you can talk to the person, and they have their points, and you do not know what they're thinking. And that's interesting. And I think that's the case for everyone. I do not have split personality. I think all human beings are like that. They just tend to ignore the other parts of them.
yeah. I'm just wondering what to refer to that aspect of yourself as, the young armored self or young armor?
Just him, me. I
Mm,
found this with my wife. When referring to, because we've only done like one at a time. So we just refer to the third person as like her
mm,
rather than you. So him rather than me, I guess.
yeah,
But I don't know. We feel so similar. It's like us. Anyway,
yeah. I should
I
let you
think
get to bed.
we should say good night.
Yes,
And thank you for your help today. And
yes,
look forward to recording tomorrow.
yeah, yeah. So, for those listening, see you next week for part two. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that went way deeper than I thought.
Yeah, oh well. Bye.
See ya.